Welcome to the Fair Observer podcast in collaboration with the IAFOR Research Center, IRC, at the Osaka School of International Public Policy. My name is Haruko Satoh, co-director of the IRC and today's moderator. This podcast series, Implications of Ukraine on Asia, is part of the IRC project Peace and Human Security in Asia towards a meaningful Japan-Korea partnership sponsored by the Korea Foundation. This episode is Realpolitik Back is the first in the series of 3 episodes. We have today Bryce Wakefield, Executive Director of the Australian Institute of International Affairs, and Jaewaoo Choo, Professor of Chinese Studies at Kyung Hee University in Seoul, to join the conversation. Hello Jaewaoo, hello Bryce. We hope to shed light to a regional relations landscape that may emerge as a result of Ukraine and discuss some of the challenges and prospects. So let me ask first to both of you. The war in Ukraine is turning out to be quite transformative in many ways, not least for European security, but also for Asian security. I think the rippling effect is quite tremendous, and I really have no idea where things are going. But what will emerge at the end of this tunnel when there are talks of the end of globalization as we've known it, and also a growing cynicism towards US leadership and Western double standards? So, this is basically the first question. What, in your views, would be the immediate concerns and challenges? For example, this comparison with Ukraine being the next Taiwan, or if it's not the case, what are some of the concerns that we really should be looking to? And this would also include the United Nations and what of UN Security Council reform, so on and so forth. So first, shall I turn to Bryce?
Sure, Haruko. Thanks for having me on. Look, there's a lot to unpack in your introduction there. Um, I'd start out by saying, a lot when the Ukraine invasion first happened, there was an article in, I think it was the Sydney Morning Herald, by the journalist Peter Harcher, who declared that the rules-based order is dead. It's over. Um, I think that sort of language goes a bit too far. I mean, I think that we have to firstly sit back and watch how this plays out. Um, but people who are predicting the death of, for example, the 1945 system, the system of alliances based on U.S. security guarantees, the system of international law that has been maintained since the Second World War. Such predictions are a little bit premature. We have to realize that the 1945 system, or the San Francisco system, if you want to call it that, has gone through several reiterations since it was put together. And we may be looking at a new reiteration of it. Certainly, the thinking in think tank circles and university circles is that US power is declining, but that doesn't mean the system of alliances that has, to some extent, sustained the international order in that post-war period is dead and buried. It probably means that it will take a new form with partners around the world, and we're thinking the EU, Australia, Japan, playing more of an active role within their respective alliances than the notion that the alliance system is over, as it were.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Bryce. So Jaewoong, your thoughts on what's coming?
I have to go along with Bryce too on this question, uh, but I'm probably more optimistic. Yes, I think we're in good hands of San Francisco system here. Without it, I think East Asia would be a mess. We would have gone through we would have gone through what Europe went through in the 90s and at this particular juncture. So, the San Francisco system is still effective in keeping the region in peace and stability because of the strong alliance system that the United States has built following the ratification of San Francisco Treaty. And the bilateral alliance system is basically pushing everything under the rug. The potential territorial dispute, the borderline disputes, and so forth. So, although you know, these conflicts still remain dormant in our relationship, as we can see with in China's case. But my concern would be rather on the United Nations. The United Nations, in the absence of a strong alliance system and the collapse of what do you call it, the Alta system, and I think it hasn't been too effective in keeping other regions in peace. Uh, and we see Russia's veto and China's absentee vote that has failed the United Nations to take any kind of resolutions in Ukraine case. And with recent North Korea's provocations, the United Nations Security Council tried to rally a resolution against North Korea and additional sanctions, but also ran into the opposition of China and Russia. So it, it is not our choice any longer that we would have to remain idle and just watch North Korea taking probably the seventh nuclear test probably in the following month. So we got to do something about the United Nations. I think today's talk should be more focused on our concern with United Nations instead of this particular region.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jaewoong. Actually, I'm
yes,
I'm more than happy to discuss that.
thank
But
you.
okay, so let me come back to the UN question because you said some uh, interesting things about the San Francisco system and how that works or endures and it has its virtues, whereas the UN system or the United Nations itself is in some ways faltering in keeping other regions peace. I think that's a very important or interesting observation because, um, but w- but let me just get back to that in a bit because as part of the Korea Foundation thing, I do have to address something to do with this region. And this is why the combination of you and Bryce are here because we're basically the three plus Singapore, the countries that joined the Western sanctions. So the next question actually is turning to Asia, and it really is about the Asian like-minded states that joined the West economic sanctions against Russia. And these are Australia, Japan, Republic of Korea, and Singapore. And this is in some ways somewhat of a hub and spokes lineup, but I believe that each have different calculations to join this Western chorus to condemn Russia, and with perhaps different consequences as well as gains. And here, I think obviously the concern for all of us is the direction of US China relations and how that would impact this region. And this includes, of course, the San Francisco system, because so many issues stem from this bilateral relationship, from the nature of the order, as well as global and regional economic and financial system, to divisive issues over values such as democracy and human rights, issues of global concern such as climate crisis, public health, energy security. And to this, we might also add that there are issues in this region that are in the humanitarian, development, and peace nexus. But in particular, in reference to particularly the three countries that we represent, Australia, Japan, and Korea, we're all allied security wise to the United States, but also have deep economic interdependence with China. So, given this is an interesting moment, I think, where we could probably speak about our country's calculations, risks, and how the Ukraine situation and how China behaves towards or within this sort of leaning towards Russia or leaning towards the United Nations, leaning towards whatever calculations that China may have, may impact also our relationship with both countries, the United States and China. So, could we have a few words on those, perhaps this time starting with Jaewooo?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's an interesting moment for China. Uh, China is obviously undergoing, or China is in a leadership transition period this year. And historically, when China is undergoing a leadership transition period, their external relationship has been really relatively calm. They don't try to be provocative. They would like try to they would like to deflect any kind of external challenges that might affect the transition process. So rather, they would like to concentrate on the domestic issues and emphasizing on domestic stability and the progress of the work that they've been putting together for the success of the transition, uh, power transition here. So it I think for that reason, China we can see China being rather uh, less proactive when it comes to its external foreign relations issues, to the extent that uh, they may they may seem a little uh, inactive. They would like to, China probably would like to keep as low profile as they could possibly in their external relations. So I think if the United States wants to strengthen its alliance system, I think this is good timing. That's why I've been telling my current colleagues here that if you want to make a final decision on joining Quad or Indo-Pacific strategy, I think this is good timing. And if you have something that you want to demand to China, I think this is also good timing too. You want to be as proactive as possible if you want to let something all out on China. So this is an interesting period when it comes to China's foreign policy. I think we can take advantage of that. And also, I think China is, I think they're caught off guard by the new form of war that was being displayed in Ukraine. I think China was caught off guard 30 years ago during the Gulf War. They were really shocked by the firepower of the United States new weapons and weaponries. And this time, new form of war, I would call it a hybrid war that is being displayed in Ukraine is I think it's really surprising to China. And for that reason, I don't think China can be really as a concern that we like to depict especially in its relationship with Taiwan. I don't think after observing the international society's sanction that they took against Russia uh, is pleasing to China. I think that they would have to do the recalculation of their military strategy, especially in the context of Taiwan Strait. So I think China is in demand for new strategy in the aftermath of Ukraine war. I think that's another point that's going to hold back China. Mm. And so I think for Korea, especially with our new government coming in May, they're very proactive in rebuilding our relationship with the United States and Japan, and to the extent that this government has a strong interest in building relationship with Australia too. Whether that could directly translate into our, uh, you know, a straight pass to Quad, but still, yeah, I think they have a strong motivation and interest in strengthening relationship with the members of Quad, and that's for sure. So I think the incoming government of Korea, we could safely say that that will be more taking sides with like-minded states, and our government is going to try to make greater contributions to preserving the international liberal order. Yeah, that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
Reassuring, sweet to Japanese ears. Anyway, so Bryce, so what is your or Australia's positioning in all this?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about the government's positioning in brief, because it's not just the Chinese government that is going through a transition period. It also might be the Australian government because we have an election coming up in a couple of months. And several commentators have noted that, and this goes beyond before the Ukraine crisis, that the government has tried to frame this as what we call a khaki election. In other words, one where national security issues are brought to the fore. Now, I don't think the public is going to vote on national security issues, but it's something that the government has certainly tried to use to differentiate itself from the opposition. The opposition is trying very hard to create the impression, at least, that there is no difference. But we had, for example, the prime minister, and he was called out for this by the speaker. But we had him calling the leader of the opposition a Manchurian candidate. That sort of language is starting to appear now after the Ukraine crisis, or after the beginning of the Ukraine invasion. The prime minister Scott Morrison gave a speech where he referred to China and Russia being part of an arc of autocracy. So, in a sense, he's kind of mirroring language that's coming out of the United States on the current sort of global contestation being a contest between democracies and authoritarian states. Now, there's something of a danger in this. Now, Morrison's gambit here, of course, is to put Russia and Ukraine in the same box as China, and of course, he's been criticizing China throughout his term as prime minister quite harshly, and to put Russia, which is kind of the current bad guy, into the same box as China and label them both autocracies, plays into his domestic political calculations. But there's the risk, I think, of conflating the two countries. And that leads to a risk of a lack of policy differentiation between the two, and that's unwise, I think, because although neither the Putin regime, if we can call it that, nor the CCP under Xi, or indeed at all, are particularly pleasant regimes to deal with. They are different. Russia is a kleptocracy, and China is a socialist market economy, and the way that things are run in both of these countries are different. So you do need some policy differentiation in how you deal with them. The other risk, I think, is if you're going to start labeling countries as non-democratic. So there are two norms, if you like, at play in the Ukraine crisis, and there's a clear violation of sovereignty, the norm of sovereignty, and also you can talk about uh, Russia and China, I guess, versus the West, and these very kind of Manichaean terms, democracies versus autocracies. Um, and I think it's clear that we ought to condemn China and Russia for both, well, for Russia at least for violating the norm of sovereignty, and both for being anti-democratic nations. But if you lean too heavily on the critique of autocracy or authoritarianism, you may well find, Australia may well find, that it is going to alienate some of its neighbours around the region, particularly those states that are in play in the South China Sea. So those states can get on board with the message of a rules-based international order when such language refers to the principle of sovereignty, which of course is a principle that all states within the UN system claim to uphold. Even Russia, had a very very thin fig leaf of protecting the rights of what it saw as independent states in Donetsk and Luhansk. But when you start veering off into a kind of black versus white, democracy versus autocracy narrative, then you may well lose. Of course, we all want to be democratic, but you may well lose some of the states that you are attempting to convince in your messaging on China. So a lot of Australia's messaging is a little bit simplistic. I think is complicated by India, which I'm sure we'll talk about in greater detail, but of course abstained from the resolution um, on sanctioning Russia. But what should be noted is that a lot of states in Southeast Asia also basically didn't put their name to the resolution. So in the General Assembly, not in the UNSC. So it's complicated. Basically, is the message that we should be adopting here, and we should be adopting finely tuned policy responses to different states around the world and in the region.
Thank you, Bryce. Actually, thank you for talking about that sort of the danger of the labeling authoritarian versus democracy. I think that's really quite an important conversation that I think I should have with some of my European colleagues too. Um, but anyway, I will also give my 2 cents on Japan because I think Japan is, uh, as you know, we've had a new prime minister elected in October out of a surprise uh, sort of resignation or stepping down of Prime Minister Suga. And this, to me, is I've written somewhere, I think, that it presents Japan with a very, at least, less ideologically charged government that won't go chasing after sort of historical identity issues and justification and bringing out some revisionist views that on history that hamper a lot of our relationship with Japan's neighbors. And at the moment, I would really like the everybody to ignore whatever is that former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo is talking about from the sidelines about Japan deploying American nuclear weapons on Japanese soil. Even his brother, uh, Defense Minister Kishi, has been very, very quick to deny this. And Prime Minister Kishida also does not have any such intentions. But I know that the Western media has been picking up on Prime Minister's Abe-san's provocations almost, but that is very unlikely. Nonetheless, I think the important thing about the Kishida government is that it will pursue some of these strategic objectives that were outlined during the past 10 years by Prime Minister Abe as well as Prime Minister Suga. And to that, it will be really about strengthening and enhancing Japan's defense cooperation with United States and also with, as it's happening also with countries like Australia and hopefully with Korea at some point along the way. But I think the important thing is that Japan, out of all the countries running into a nationalism phase and populist phase, might really be coming out of it. For better or for worse, the Liberal Democratic Party, whether you like them or not, as a ruling party, will once again be more of a broad church of views, particularly about foreign and security policy. I very much doubt that constitutional revision is going to be seriously pursued. And so, in that sense, it will be a kind of more stable anchoring country in particularly for this region where we will be less of a cause for concern and hopefully and just like recently I think last week Prime Minister Kishida had a conversation with Prime Minister Modi, and so in that way, as Bryce mentioned, a lot of things are complicated and each of us, each, Australia, Japan and South Korea would have its own sort of niche places where they can perform a role in gluing this region together. But I think the point may be that Japan, at least, has gone through a sort of a phase of rise of right wing nationalism, and it's coming out of it, which might be a slight, I don't know. I mean, a positive thing, at least, given what is happening in other parts where we will see a lot of leadership changes um, and elections. So the thing to watch, I suppose, would be the upcoming upper house elections in the summer. But other than that, fortuitously, I think Japan is in the middle. So that's my sort of
Can I
2 cents.
ask you a
Yes,
question there, Haruko?
sure, sure.
So last year there was much to do and much idle speculation, including my own, about what Abe's role would be and what the role of the Japanese right would be, and including speculations about a deal struck between Kishida and Takaichi Sanai, who I think is what the head of the LDP's policy unit, the PARC, Policy Affairs Research Committee, isn't it?
Mm.
Uh, do you actually see any influence being? I mean, it sounds to me like you don't. There was speculation on what Kishida sold to Abe and Takaichi in exchange for their support in the runoff election. And it seems to me that you're saying that there, that influence has pretty much waned. I'd agree with you. I mean, I think, you know, Abe talking about nuclear weapons and Taiwan on TV is is sort of irrelevant. It's Abe says what he likes when he's not prime minister. It's when he's prime minister that his comments count. But do you see no? I mean, there were commentators in the New York Times, for example, saying that Kishida would sort of just be Abe's puppet. Do you not see that as the case now?
No, I don't see him as simply a puppet. Um, they're both veteran politicians. Kishida, for one, probably has more parliamentary experience, but that's not the only reason. I think that he placed Hayashi Yoshimasa as foreign minister um, says a lot because that was something that was,
Because of Hayashi's connections to China, I
and
take it. You mean?
also Hayashi is also a rival political family in the same sort of district in Yamaguchi as Abe.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
and these two family, Hayashi and the Abe family, go back uh, when Japan still had the middle uh, district, for elections, middle-sized district, and they were rivals. Uh, so for Kishida to put him to a point, and this is a direct result of the Amari Akira losing um, in the first instance in his single seat constituency during the general elections. He resigned as the party secretary general of the LDP. Then he replaced. So this was the moment that where the ironclad fist sort of loosened. Uh, and I think Kishida-san saw the opportunity and put Hayashi as foreign minister as a kind of a counterweight also to Kishi, who is also, I think he's the secretary of the Taiwan Japan Parliamentarians Association. Um, so this this is, and depending on the election results in the summer, it might further strengthen Kishida's position. And there's a lot of moving about in the factions too in the Liberal Democratic Party, and I really do think that there is some sort of nationalism, right wing fatigue in Japan. These are not the issues that the people are particularly interested in. So when the voting counts, um, and people, I think they really want more sort of down to earth, bread and butter issues like the economy to get better. So in that sense, I really uh, those who like to speculate that or to dismiss Kishida as Abe's puppet, I think um, is really overestimating or underestimating the party dynamics in the LDP itself. I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely.
So yes. So okay, thank you. So I think we'd like to sort of finally turn to the last question, which I would really, at first I was actually going to ask, discuss things about how um, the new sort of mini-lateralism or sort of different shapes of cooperation between, especially for sort of middle-sized states like all of us, Japan, Australia, and South Korea, might do for the future. But I'd like to really return to what Jaewooo suggested about the United Nations, um, and um, and also in relation to why the San Francisco system is for its fluidity, and as also Bryce said, it's gone through different iterations over the past 70 years, has endured and it's likely to endure, while the United Nations is somewhat in, well, we need to really address some of the the weaknesses that the United Nations has always had, actually, but is now being sort of demonstratively becoming uh, clearly problematic. So, would you like to, Bryce? Would you like to start on this?
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, we can talk about United Nations reform, and in particular Security Council reform, until we're blue in the face. It's probably not going to happen. I mean, once you give the five permanent members the veto power, there's really no possibility for change. Now, would it be lovely if we had I don't know, a P8 with, a majority veto or something, rather than just any single state able to crash the system? Yes, that would be nice. Of course, it would be, but we don't have that. That's not the world we live in, and I don't think we're going to get it. I would say though that a lot of people. I mean, look, this is the system that was built precisely in order to buy the in order to have the buy-in of the great powers. And when there is great power conflict, the Security Council, at least, grinds to a halt. But that isn't the first time that we've seen this. In fact, um, for the entirety of the Cold War, that was more or less the situation, right? You didn't the United Nations was basically, useless in several conflicts that involved the great powers. If you think Vietnam, and after the Cold War as well, I mean, the United States tried to establish its own fig leaf before the invasion of Iraq, but that was clearly an illegal invasion, and in my mind, clearly not sanctioned by a Security Council resolution, and the United Nations was more or less helpless to stop it. So when we talk about the value of the United Nations in conflicts like these, it's never so much in the power of the Security Council to prevent conflict. The value of the United Nations is through its various agencies that are going to be able to provide aid and relief to the Ukraine, particularly once the conflict has ended. It's in declaratory statements by figures like the Secretary General about the illegality of Russia's position. It's in measures like that, or and measures we've already seen. A sort of normative statement by the UN General Assembly. So all of these things do count. They do show delinquent states, let's say, where the power of international norms, such as they are, lie. And but we're not. The Security Council is not going to be particularly effective in any situation like this, and has not been through its past. Now, that's not to say that the UN system is broken or valueless. I mean, there are other measures that the United Nations and its agencies will take to alleviate the problems that we're facing now.
Right. Thank you. So, Jaewooo Choo.
I definitely agree with Bryce on the United Nations questions. But definitely, I think that there's one critical factor that is related to great power politics, and great power politics uh, has to be fixed in some way. I have no idea at all, but I think when Bryce mentioned about crisis prevention and crisis management, I think the United Nations should be given the responsibility for crisis prevention alone with its various agency at work. But crisis management, I think the mandate of crisis management should be provided to some of the effective measures and means, such as alliance or uh, or a friendly nation supporting the invaded or intruded partner. I think that's probably one way to go. I don't know, just off the top of my head. But when it comes to San Francisco system, I think from Ukraine case, I think we have learned a very very valuable lesson. When it comes to collective security system, I don't think anybody should be left out. No one can be left out. We cannot leave anybody from behind. We cannot leave anybody behind because Ukraine was certainly not included in NATO, and I think that gave rise to Russia's provocations. And but with our at least the bilateral system that the United States is leading in this region, I think that's why with the effective regional order and system, I think it is more effective as of today. But down the long run, the United States would like to transform the current bilateral security system into a collective one based on inter-alliance that the United States has been aspiring since the 50s. And probably with the effective security San Francisco system plus collective security system that the United States would like to see as an inclusive one, I think we could have a different story here. I think it could be more effective against the rise of China. I think it could be effective against anybody that is trying to be provocative as Russia is being today. And I think from Korea's perspective, I think we should be more proactive in this endeavor because realistically speaking, for Quad or Indo-Pacific strategy, whatever, which one, I think Korea would be a very critical partner, not only in sheer terms of military strength and power, but also its geographical location and geopolitical strategic value. Because with Quad, obviously Japan's military is constrained by the so-called peace constitution, and the self-defense force is only half the size of the Korea's, and the active military personnel in case of war, that the Japanese self-defense force could be reduced to half. And you look at Australia, and Australia's military size is only, I believe, 1/10 of South Korea's, standing at a little more than 50,000 forces. And so, you look at ASEAN states, and historically, ASEAN states has not been really too serving to the interest of the United States when it comes to regional security affairs. So that's why South Korea could become a very critical partner to the United States pursuit of Quad and Indo-Pacific strategy for them to become more effective. And I think that's where a strong bargaining chip lies for South Korea's security interests in the region. I think so. South Korea should seize the moment and take a full advantage of the situation, and especially with K-Trump-like leadership coming in, I think we could strengthen our relationship with like-minded states and other U.S. allies. including Japan and Australia. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have one question for Jaewooo. So
Mm.
you have this K Trump kind of president, but my view is that it will take some time for Japan and Korea's relationship to get to a level where both countries are comfortable of,
Hmm.
say, enhanced sort of partnership within the Quad Plus. Or though
Yeah.
I agree with you that it's crucial, and especially now that
Mm.
we have these and AUKUS and other U.S. initiatives that want to sort of, as you say, strengthen the bilateral alliances and also with cooperation with the EU. But do, what's your prospect on this? What would be the obstacles, or what would be the window? Where is the window of opportunity for the two countries to
Yeah.
see eye to eye?
Yeah. I know. The biggest obstacle I see in our relationship with Japan is we have to come up with some sort of concrete ideas and reasons as to why we want to strengthen our relationship with Japan. I've been advising a couple of presidential candidates, and including Mr. Yoon, who was elected, that he needs to find something really precise, persuasive to the ears of not only Japanese prime minister and politicians, but also the Japanese public. After 5 years of our current government uh, behaving in such a way, we want to turn the page over, right? And show something that is 180 degrees different from the previous government. And if we just approach Japan with a simple and emotional reason, uh, a good example would be, "Hey, we are neighboring states, so we should have a better relationship." I don't think that's going to be too persuasive to Japan after all those years of harsh attacking, harsh attacking of Japan. But we have to come up with something really constructive in order to buy the minds and garner support from Japanese public. And I think that's where a crucial challenge uh, lies in Yoon's government Japan policy. I would say, uh, but I think they're struggling with that particular question right now. And since I was dropped off from the transition committee, I'm not gonna give my ideas to them right now. But I will have a chance. I'll have a chance. Uh, I think I'm gonna write that in my next op-ed coming on April 5th.
Good, 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 good.
Yeah, they they left me out.
Oh, well, I think it's
According to yeah, yeah.
no, no,
Go
no,
ahead.
no. But Bryce, what are your thoughts on these sort of new development relations with Australia and Japan, and how do you see um, a way for Korea to join in um, from an Australian perspective?
Yeah, I might take a pass on the last bit of your question. I mean, I'm not terribly confident or persuaded that that will at some stage happen. But look, the Japan Australia relationship is, of course, blossoming at the moment, and for good reason. Obviously, the Australians and Japanese are both trying to figure out where they sit within Asia vis-a-vis China and vis-a-vis the U.S. alliance as well. I mean, a lot of the new activity between Japan and Australia is predicated on the notion, I think, uh, of of US allied partners being more active in a context of declining US power. And that includes both stepping up to the plate to do more for ourselves, but also encouraging the United States to stay relevant and current within the region. What's interesting, though, I think about the US Australia relationship is that it's not asymmetrical like that of the US Japan relationship, or for that matter, the US Australia relationship. But the US Japan relationship in particular has been one that's been based on asymmetry. So the basic calculus is that the Japanese provide bases and the US provides protection and military heft. Now, that's not the case in the US Australia relationship. So we'll probably see uh, different kind of configurations of military cooperation emerging. There's also another dynamic that's relevant, and that is in the United States and Japan. The concept of the use of force uh, is actually quite different. So Japan, like Australia and like most countries, sees a very high threshold as to what constitutes the use of force in international law, and therefore what would be a response by Japan. Uh, the United States just basically believes that anything that is enacted against its military forces is the use of force. And so, therefore, there have been difficulties around how the American and Japanese militaries cooperate, which are not going to be present in the case of Australia and Japan. So, again, you might see on the part of Japan, at least, more sort of um, in a sort of a more innovative way of developing policy when it's cooperating with this other partner that has very similar ideas about what the use of force actually is. It's actually a very complicated issue, but I think it's a very relevant one within the relationship. Having said that, I think there are going to be some difficulties in the way the two militaries cooperate because although there are similar ideas surrounding the use of force, there are different ideas, as with the United States, surrounding uh, the state's prerogative to use the military. So, like the United States, Australia doesn't really have any legislative um, restrictions on when military forces or where military forces are deployed, and in what actions they can be used. Whereas in Japan, I mean, in the Japanese case, when talking about the constitution, everybody tends to focus on Article 9, but a lot of the restrictions surrounding the Japanese military actually result in the fact that the prime minister doesn't have prerogative powers when it comes to the military. The prime minister can only enact the policy that he or maybe one day she has been has been provided by the Diet, and that's a very different kind of framework from the framework in which the United States and Australia operate in, and that's going to have to be. I don't think that's very well understood. It is something that is potentially consequential for cooperation between Japan and Australia. As listeners will know, Japan and Australia have recently signed a reciprocal access agreement, and that's been sort of played up, at least by the Australian government, as a new kind of security pact. It's nothing of the sort. It is a legal arrangement that allows essentially a framework for the two nations' forces to be within each other's country legally, and that's significant, but it isn't the meat and potatoes of the security arrangement. Um, uh, meat and potatoes, very Western reference there. What is going to be more significant are the agreements that will follow, that will lay out exactly what cooperation is possible, and what cooperation the two countries will undertake, and that's going to be largely defined by the self-defense forces law in Japan, because without that legal framework in Japan, the Japanese forces can't do anything. The executive in Japan doesn't have the prerogatives as they do in Australia. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. I assume it's going to be a very arduous process in terms of the negotiations. So, the fact that we've got a reciprocal access agreement isn't sort of game over and here comes Japanese remilitarization or something like that. It is part of a slow process where the roles and responsibilities of two countries that are very complementary are going to be consistently redefined and updated.
Thank you. Thank, thanks, Bryce. It's I think the part about the agreement, as well as the Japanese Prime Minister's prerogative powers being a lot more limited, is it's actually a very important point that many overlook. Actually, I don't think even the Japanese know. Anyway, so I think we're coming to the end of our recording of the podcast, and first of all, my little 10-second takeaway was that I think in general we are turning a page because of and in spite of Ukraine, and that the region, at least the San Francisco system based arrangements, are not as bad or tattered or affected even as some may presume because of Ukraine. And the observations about China, I think, is also very important that Jaewaoo gave about the sort of foreign policy postures that the current Chinese regime would have. And as for closer ties, Quad Plus, to say that we've begun a new chapter. If we're in agreement with that, I think we're pretty much set for at least an open mindset of dialogue. So I hope we progress in a positive direction.
And that's it for today. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fair Observer podcast in collaboration with the IAFOR Research Center, Osaka School of International Public Policy. I hope you can join us again in our next episode. Goodbye.